Recording in progress. So let me introduce Maksim Demin once again from Ruhr University in Bochum, speaking on discourses on racial inequality in journalism and literature during the era of the Great Reforms. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Sarah Dickinson and Anna Lowsbury for giving me the chance to present at the seminar, and Mina Magda to willing to participate as a discussant, or собеседница. And for me, it is really a big honor to give a talk on racial discourse at the German Center, because this center is hosted so many inspiring events on the capitalization of race in Russophone culture. So let me, So I would like to start with giving some context to my interest in this topic. And first of all, I'm doing it in a frame of my book project, Experiments on Soul, Philosophy, and the Rise of Psychology in Imperial Russia. So the book is dedicated to philosophical discussions surrounding the emergence of psychology in the long 19th century. And one of the chapters is devoted to public debates about scientific discoveries from the late 1850s to the mid 1860s. And digging to this subject, I was shocked actually how to find anti-racist and especially anti-Black statements made by many key thinkers who are part of intellectual canon of that period. And I thought, I need to understand what's going on. And moving from a very philosophical question, is it soul reducible to biological body? So it's body-mind problem, philosophical problem. I started to see more culture context and to see it from much broader perspective about the debate on racial superiority and conceptualization of the race. So I will focus mainly on so-called materialists or nihilist movement or radical intelligence, or I may call it progressive left thinkers. And his response to question on body-mind problem, denying the existence of the soul as an absolute religious concept. And I also working with this topic, I realized that my interpretation is allied with the previous work, primarily the work by James Rogers, who in the 60s highlighted the presence of racial discourse among the radical intelligentsia, and Vera Tolz, who challenged the Sonderweg hypothesis of racial discourse in Russian Empire. And my aim is to reconstruct the debate on race among radical intelligentsia, and by collecting publicist text from this period, the texts that discuss the biological inequality of human beings. And now, spoiler alert, it is just the main results of my study. I will present this right away. First of all, the debate on inequality of race, primarily framed as a white-black distinction, was an important part of the public discourse. The second, the race question resulted in unusual combination of political views among the radical intelligentsia. And for me, it is why this discussion affects so little attention. Because I think that like Chernyshevsky, Dobroliubov, it was, especially for Soviet scholars, it was very hard to swallow that Chernyshevsky, not but Dobroliubov was, made some anti-racial, misogynistic statements, and we usually don't think that some left thinkers are associated with anti-black racism. And then the last point that the last conclusion that I would like to draw is radical intelligence stance on race exposed them to criticize of denying human dignity. So the critics of materialist movement was pretty aware of this anti-racial discourse or debate, and they perceive a materialist as someone who offer a theoretical frame for denying human dignity. Of course, the people the materialists wouldn't agree with such a framing, but it is how this discussion was perceived. So there is an outline of my presentation. So we already passed the first part, research context. Then I would like to move to something that, at least for me, was very interesting to explore. That Black people in Russian Empire was not only fictional characters, but also real persons. And it is not a part of this materialism debate, but I would like to show how to give you a context and to show how vital this problem was. And then the main part, it will be the structure of the debate, rational reconstruction, and I will present two racist view, or two thinkers who expose racist view and one anti-racist thinker. And I also would like to refer not publicistic and also literary text, but also some visual aims. And here on the screen you can see a cartoon which depicts a courtroom. And I will just explain, I will explain this cartoon, and in order to show you why some people may perceive as a funny. So white actress and black actor portray as the main characters of Shakespeare's play Othello in a courtroom, and with a judge, and all three engage in the following dialogue. So Desdemona: help, this savage is truly going to strange me some days. Judge: be more careful, Mr. Othello. If you actually strange her, what will happen then? Othello: nothing. You will give me another Desdemona, better than this one. So my explanation is, so it's always not a good to explain some jokes, but I will do this. So it will two strokes. At first, depicts woman's exaggerated fear of physical power and uncontrollable emotion of a black person, or black artist. Second stroke is points out that the attitude of the black actor towards the actresses. He does not to value her as a person, but seems her, but sees her as a interchangeable tool for theatrical performance. And this approach is most commonly associated with slave owners. So now the question is, like, why did the Russian journal Сын Отечества print cartoon featuring a black actor? What is the story behind this? And the explanation is very easy. At this time, an American-born British actor and theater manager was like touring across towns of Russian Empire. So his name Ara Albright. It's very important and very like significant figure. And I will show you like two responses. Like one response is on a slide. You can see that Ukrainian poet and artist Taras Shevchenko made a portrait of Ira Albright. And the idea was actually very, very clear. This portrait has been perceived as a reflection of inherent mutual understanding and solidarity between two artists. And it is a one response, friendly and showing the similarities of oppressed people. And there is a other response, Nadezhda Sakhanovskaya, and she published in a newspaper Dень, run by Yuri Samarin, so conservative Slavophiles. And he write one review. It is actually like very short essay, and the main point, I always feel like I don't want to cite a lot. I just will rephrase the citation because I'm not sure that it's worth to read it out loud. But the main idea of her is that she perceived a black body as a theatrical prop and denied artistic soul of the art of the actor. And so it's quite, I think it is just like straightforward racial prejudice. And I will turn to Nadezhda Sakhanskaya later on. So now, just to saying that it was a discussion, it was a present, not only like a fiction, but as a real persons, that triggered maybe some thoughts or some feelings of Russian society at this time. So now a structure of debates, a rational reconstruction. I try to why I need to do this. It's helps me to structure and navigate a spectrum of opinions on this matter, because I saw like there and forth some racial or just anti-racial statements, and I try to find the inner structure, the structure beneath of this discussion. So I would like to do this with two questions. So structure the debate. The first question is: so is the soul reducible to biological body? You can also ask yourself, and you can basically have only two answers: yes, and if your answer is yes, you are a materialist or physicalist. And if your answer is no, you are, I would say, non-reductionist. So it's a variety of positions, and at this time, maybe primarily including the Christian doctrine. And by the way, to give you a context, for example, Wilhelm Wundt, so the someone like German scholar who started empirical psychology, he was exactly in this category. So he didn't deny existence of the soul. Albeit he says that we need to study psycho, which is only like one part of the mental activity of the human. So materialism is, in this case, is a pretty, one end of philosophical discussion. And then there's a second question: do biological difference of race and gender, I put it in one basket, but just for sake of the time, determine a mental inequality? And actually, each camp can say yes or no, can give yes or no answer on the same question. And now I just put some like names in each box, and I think it is not comprehensive, so maybe it can be more names, and the picture will looks a little different. But here, but here you see actually the Dobroliubov, Shelgunov, Bibikov, Pisarev, and Zaitsev. So it is at least 5 persons who expressed anti-racial views. And in this camp, like materialist, the only 3, at least for some, like at least that I found, only 3. It is Chernyshevsky, Mikhailov, and physiologist Sechenov. I will focus, and my talk will be mostly on this camp. But just one comment. For example, Strahov said, I think it's very unusual position, because most of the Christian thinkers was saying that, okay, the human, like each human have a soul, and soul is given by God, and it's pretty equal, like equal quality of the soul. But Strahov said, actually, no, it's like there is a man's soul and there's a female soul. And they are not equal. So I would like to focus only 3 persons here: Dobroliubov, Shelgunov, and from another camp, Mikhailov. So now Dobroliubov, Nikolai Dobroliubov, I think it is like very, very prominent person at this time. And he was the first one who made public statements from the materialistic camp about the difference in mental capacity between men and women and across different races. And he made it in essay Organic Development of Man. This essay was technically a review of Russian translation of 2 German medical self-help books. And it's interestingly enough that only one of the German's original, namely the book from anatomist Karl Bock, offer a 5-race classification. And for this author, the topic of race was actually very, very marginal. And he only one sentence made about inequality of race, and it's looked like a very humble statements. And what make Dobroliubov, he expand, so he made a very bold statements, and he make a focus on this. So it's not just there's someone in Germany was written about race and he just discussed this topic. No, he brings this topic on the table deliberately, and and I think with full understanding about. So for him, it was not clear actually, like saying that different male and female have a different mental capacity, and different race have also different mental capacity. He didn't know actually how it was not clear for him how flexible this biological inequality is. And albeit he was skeptical to phrenology, the teaching also very like not heavily presented this time in Russia, but still have some popularity, and at this time was perceived as a already obsolete old-fashioned theory doctrine. But Dobroliubov on one hand saying that actually phrenology is wrong, or like absolute. He still saying that actually mental activity can be trained as a muscles in the body. So, and that's why it's not clear for him how this inequality, like how hard overcome this inequality. And maybe he would say, yeah, we need to admit that there is an inequality, but actually we can easily escape of this inequality. So it is unclear for him what was his take. He made just this statement. And now this another guy, Nikolai Shelgunov, who was actually a fan of phrenology, and influenced by Darwin. And he made like he understood evolutionary theory as a struggle between lower and higher races, and his theoretical position led him to some conclusions that at the first glance seemed hardly compatible. So according to him, a black race belonged to evolutionary past of humanity. And maybe it's good enough thinking that it was just some like transmission of knowledge from Germany. But no, actually he made a 4 pages passage with a full of racist description of physiological, like of the appearance of black people, and it's not what like he was asked for. So it seems to me that it's also was once again his initiative to put this question in a very for me unpleasant racistic way. And this topic on like race and also a gender was continued to bar him. And once again, he took a pretty unusual position. So he made like on one hand he criticized the anti-Semitic interpretation of Darwin put forward by zoologist Nikolai Wagner, and he wrote some small like review of the zoologist Wagner, calling his review of fossil people ископаемые люди. And he said that no, it's like we shouldn't think that Jews it's like need to be, I don't know, like is like past of humanity, but we need, but just the opposite, we need to assimilate it, like Jews living in Russian Empire to a cosmopolitan Russian society. So on one hand, he presents Russian society as a cosmopolitan society. On the other hand, he made a very hostile statements towards Black people. And he also made a critical review, pretty long essay on Nadezhda Solokhanskaya, which called like "Женское бездушье," so female soulenness, and he argues that despite the importance of the woman's writing, Solokhanskaya works reflected a narrow-minded, limited female's perspective. So it's like it's a good example of mansplaining. So now I move to the next person. So not so the person who was anti-racist, who could take anti-racist position, and it's Mikhail Mikhailov. It's very interesting that Mikhailov has a personal connection, or very peculiar personal connection with Nikolai Shelgunov, because Mikhailov was a lover of Shelgunov's wife, and his essay about gender equality was actually devoted to her. So this is, I think it's pretty well-known text. Женщины, их воспитание и значение в семье и обществе. So women, their education and role in family and society. The text was wrote in Paris, and it was a critical engagement with a very misogynic position of Auguste Comte. And in this essay, he made such a claim. There is a racial and gender difference, but they are not distinguished. That is not important for intellectual development. So it's like it's obvious women and men differ, but it's not. It doesn't matter in terms of mental capacity. And he made a very interesting analogy. He said that first of all, like if we see that someone have a lack of education, let's say women have a lack of education, it's not because of the nature of the woman, but because of circumstances. And emancipation should be considered as a precondition for development. And he made a very interesting analogy. He made analogy with like German people and Romance people. So saying that in Rome, Germans was perceived as a low nations, and now it's not the case. And Slavs was also perceived by German as a passive race, but now it's also not the case. So and it's actually the Sechenov, who was traveled to Germany and as a student and then published in German pretty heavily. He also made the same claim that like when he made the first visit to Germany, the German professors perceive him as someone that belonged to lower race, but it's changed like rapidly when people started to be engaged with him. But in the case with the Mikhailov, the topic of race was not only just one topic of reflection, but I shall argue that it was a literal topic. So racial discourse, not in a, like, not like, I don't want to say in a good sense. So he used racial discourse as a trigger of his imagination. And he wrote a novella called Afrikan. This novella is a story about Afrikan Matveyevich, who is a grandson of an illegitimate. So he is a grandson of a legitimate child of nobleman and a Greek woman brought to the estates. And Mikhailov described the Afrikan or Afrikan Matveyevich using ethnographic and even phrenological discourse. And the Afrikan Matveyevich perceives himself as a descendant of an aristocrat, and like during the whole novel, he, for example, stands meaningfully before the portrait of his aristocratic grandfather, and he tried by all means to leave the estate. And first, they requesting permission to go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and like after being denied, he offering to enlist him as a recruit into the army, and that is how this novel ends. The story of Afrikan Matveyevich is also unusual because they try to engage in some colonial discourse, which is, according to me, Mikhailov was very interesting in. So he translated a cycle of poems by Henry Longfellow, poems on slavery, and one of these poems called Quadroon Girl, and saying that one man sold his how it's called, so the granddaughter of his father, probably. Yeah. So, and there is this quadroon girl. So, and in translating these poems, Mikhailov make us in Sovremenniki. It was published in Sovremenniki, and Mikhailov comments on his translation and especially explaining the terminology. So he especially explaining the terminology of quadroon people. So now there's another story published already after his death in Delo, and there is a story about the evolution of a primitive and black people that living without a society and language, and they went through like some stage where men must fight for a woman, and then ending up with a polygamy and the complete enslavement of the woman. And this topic is, according to me at least, so they present this essay novel present a mix of quasi-anthropological narrative with some eroticized content. So he described maybe with like it seems like how this exotic work with a quasi-scientific narrative, and probably at least it is my guess the source of inspiration was a summarized translation of one German like travel book that was published in journal Illustratia, and you can see a woman. It is a part of the illustration, and the illustration was like copy paste from German original. This is like how and actually this is how I find the source. So now, now I would like to move to opponents of materialists by showing that they that for critics of materialist, this topic on race was really was important, and it's interesting that some essays of I may call these people liberal Christian thinkers, which is completely neglected, and it is hard to find any information of them. For example, Dubensky. So he wrote a paper just before of emancipation. I think he was an economist, and he wrote very libertarian, Hume, about freedom and slavery, and explicitly saying that women have a soul. That's why they born for freedom. And Yuri Savich, there is a physician, a doctor, who also made such a statements. I don't want to go deeper to these people. I just want to show you how present the discussion was. And another person who tried to supporting the inconsistency of materialism, exactly on the question of biological inequality among people, it was Yuri Samarin, and which is explicitly probably criticized Dobroliubov by saying how you can be on one hand saying that black people are low race, and on the other hand condemning slavery in the United States. And Maria Tserbikova, who just saying that materialist and positivist always refer to smaller volume and weight of a female brain, but actually it doesn't clear of it really matter or not. And for her, it is he made some rhetorical move, and for her it's justifies that some men actually have a lack of logic. And I really like it, how she put it. The next one is the problem of utilitarianism. So it's very it's famously known that Chernyshevsky was, or materialist was in favor of utilitarianism. So utilitarianism, we need to all action will be morally justifiable if they lead to great happiness and minimize suffering. And there is two texts, two essays. Alexander Grigoryevsky, essay called on the abolition of slavery in the British colonies, made 3 years before emancipation of serfs, and Nikolai Chernyshevsky, a small essay on the same topic. So they both try to explore if slave labor is efficient, and both lead to the same conclusion, that actually citing economical data from the Caribbean islands, they argue that slave labor is less efficient than the free labor. And but however, Grigoryevsky adds that even if that were not the case, So even if we will have the data that will justify that actually slave labor is more efficient, we need to abolish slavery because of our Christian duty. And Chernyshevsky didn't say anything about the alternative scenario, but I think for some for people like Yuri Samarin, it was actually a very big flaw on this argument, because what if slave labor very efficient? How you can justify that it need to be abolished? And I think, of course, Chernyshevsky may have some ideas how he can do it, but I think it was perceived as a problem. And also showing a picture on the left side of the slide, it's called it's from Iskra, and it's called "Hearse of the Progress of Progress," and slogan on the flag, "Black Slavery." And for me, it is, you can double read this image, but for me it is somehow, it's a play between meanings that the progress consider people as mechanisms, and it can be programs can be very bad for human dignity. And almost the last slide before I'm making a conclusion. So it's another cartoon which depicts two young men wearing animal mask while sitting in a restaurant. And one of them speak with a pride. I have no castle prejudice. I make no distinction between people. It doesn't matter to me was ever noble or peasant, as long as she pretty. And I think my interpretation is that the cartoon mocks the utilitarian way of thinking, suggesting that the woman's sexual appearance is only thing that matters, and making analogy with animal wars. So it's downplay the social distinctions and undermines the female dignity and liberty. So at least for someone who criticized utilitarianism and materialism way of thinking. So jump to conclusion. I hope I show that debate on inequality of race was important part of the public discourse. Maybe way present as people usually think. And the race question resulted in an unusual combination of political views. So the progressivist, left progressivist, actually some of them was exposed to misogynic and anti-racial thinking. And for opponents of materialism, it was a matter. So they spot this move, and this stance of radical intelligence expose them to criticism of denying the human dignity. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Maksim, for that fascinating presentation. Now we'll go to Dr. Mina Magda, who will open our discussion. Thank you.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
So thank you, Maksim, for your fascinating talk on sort of the inheritance of scientific codifications of race in Russian intellectual history. I feel you raise so many important questions, but also areas for future research that I think are consequential for the field and how it might newly approach race and Blackness in the 19th century. These are problems that I think largely remain at an impasse. So my first question is about reception. I was curious when listening to you, who else the radical intelligentsia was reading other than Darwin? I know you mentioned the German. I didn't quite know if he was an anthropologist or an ethnographer, but social scientist anyway, who seemed to have influenced the African novella. But I'm wondering if these debates were influenced by theoreticians of race science such as Gobineau or Georges Cuvier, by theories of polygenesis.
Yeah.
I also want to know if you found any traces of racial theories in Russian intellectual history before the 1850s. I think it's 1858 is kind of the official start date for the discourse that you're presenting. So yes, who else were they reading? Were they influenced, especially by the major theoreticians of like the French school? And did you find these discussions happening before the mid-19th century? And then my second question, it has to do with gender, which I know you didn't get to address gender and sexuality because of time constraints. So I'm hoping we can do a little bit of that now. Early on, you said that racial and gender differences sort of existed, but they weren't decisive for intellectual development or maybe ideas of intellectual development. But thinking back to Dobroliubov's statement about gender differentiated brain weights, I'm curious about sort of the import of gender and race for theories of biological and physiological development in Russia. How do we deal with the reception of scientific racism in Russia without addressing the fact, for instance, that, the spectacularization of Sarah Bartman, one of many Venus Hottentots who sort of circulated between the imperial cores of Western Europe, was crucial for the development of biological and medical theories of Black hypersexuality and sexual deviance. These sort of ideas supposedly being evidenced by her genital hypertrophy and protruding buttocks. I also have this quote from Sander Gilman, who wrote, the seminal essay on this matter. While many groups of African Blacks were known to Europeans in the 19th century, the Hottentot remained representative of the essence of the Black, especially the Black female. So I'm wondering how race and gender and sexuality sort of intersect in these theories. And I think, for my own research on race and 19th century visual culture, I feel sort of plagued by what seems to be an illusion of gender, or perhaps what is a totalizing sort of masculization of Blackness. So I'm interested to hear how and if and how this problematic comes up for you. And I'm happy to rephrase any of that if you need.
Yeah, first of all, I appreciate of your comments. I can say straightforward, I don't really familiar with the scientific discourse about race in Russian Empire. Is it time at that time? Because I think it's come a little like later. It will be some like it was always anthropological, like some way of framing people, or some like with some ideas of race, and but I think it is like the scientific discourse. Like we need to, at least I prefer to keep it apart, because for me with this like publicistic and with this like popularization of science, because I think with this popularization of science people made a much more like bolder statements, and it's also about like anti-black, because I think like in Russia this time there's many other race that maybe should be bothered, maybe should be more relevant to scientific discourse, or to public discourse, and for me, like I'm also not quite sure that I'm capable to answer on one of your question, what was before late 50s, because it's definitely something worse. But I think it was, especially in this time, it was very like important to stress some difference or some similarity, but also differences between like Russian slavery, Russian slavedom, and slavery. And for me, it is like this connection. It's not obvious, or at least it's with some. I think we can also find some ideas which was like because like many, like if we can imagine that many of intellectuals have some serfs, and they may have also the idea that actually I'm not sure that it's just a hypothesis, and I would like to show you once again my slide, and here is can you see it, Alexander Herson mockery on? So for me, it was always like I feel strange that someone not put on the table this idea that like serf owner and serfs as the same, like the same race, and that's why it is how like this standard abolitionist argument doesn't work. And I find some only one like statements about it. It was published in the Bell, and it was like a letter from woman land owner trying to justify her hostility towards her peasant by saying that actually like peasant have like he has designed to like for like hard work and like we landowner designed for like management and so on. And this like short letter, which supposedly was written by Herson himself, it's just like mockery. It is just like joke. It's called like about physiology and zoology landowner. So he made this like mirroring, so this argument that actually like it's so ridiculous that so such argument should be considered as so ridiculous that no one can say it seriously. But I think for some people it can be read in full way. I think it's like called rational inclusivity. So you may say, yeah, it's works like biological equality between landowner and peasant in Russia led to emancipation. But if you think that actually like black people and white people are different, you may think that slavery in the United States still justifiable. Like I mean that maybe like this discussion on inequality of race will work in one direction, just to support like equality inside of Russian community, but also contrast to someone else. I'm not sure, like it is my hypothesis. I need to like double check if it's like if it can read in a such a way. But if it is, I think it's also can explain why this topic was so important. Like, I mean, it's not obvious why this all people need to discuss like way again like this difference between race and sex. And so the last question that I can actually like answer, what was the source they referred to, and I think it's just, we can say, yeah, it was like a package deal. Like if you want to like if you as a thinker try to catch up latest development in science, you need to admit that like contemporary to this day science says that people are unequal, and then it's like hard to swallow, but we need to say women are less intelligent than men. And I think it is how people perceive it. And for example, Bibikov, I didn't mention him, but he wrote a review on German materialist Vogt. And this Vogt says that women have a very conservative instinct. So the instinct of women are conservative. And Bibikov said, no, I disagree. Actually, a woman is childish and they're joyful and playful. So, and it's like, it's ridiculous. I mean, meaning that like what is the quality of science you need to like to make? Yeah, it's just like some visual thinking and prejudice that people are broadcasting to the paper. So I'm not sure that I answer all of your question, or so it's obviously for some question I didn't answer because I didn't know, but I hope my comments was helpful for your question, but maybe I need to like think it twice and going to direction of your questions.
That's okay. I know my second question was especially long, but I'm going to paraphrase, but in that James Allen, I think that was his name, right? You had a quote from the beginning of an article on race and racism. Do you remember what I'm talking about? Was it not James Allen?
From the David Rainbow volume?
No, it was like a screenshot from an article that, it said something to the effect of like Russia
Yeah.
fully condemned American slavery as a manifestation of racism. That was kind of like where racial discourse was in the early 19th century. It was early on in a slide.
Can you see my slides?
Yeah. Okay, so I think it's on the third slide. James Allen Rogers, that's what it was. Racism and Russian Revolutionist.
Yeah.
You can't really read it, but does it say something like that, what I just said?
Yeah, I mean, so
Yeah.
as I understood this article, it was just like Russian revolutionists. Some of them was racist, and he cited Dobroliubov, and also some of them, and on that matter, this this paper like important to me. And there was like one like immigrant from Russia to France, who was he was who was in United States, and he compared like Russian serfdom and American slavery, make
Yeah.
like formalize such a comparison, which is
Yeah.
also very yeah.
So my question was, I'm just going to read it really quickly. He says, the issue of racism was never a controversy among Russian radical thinkers before 1864. Their attitude towards racism until then seems remarkably consistent. Outright condemnation. They saw in racism an integral part of the system of American slavery. So this caught my attention because what happens? A lot of things happen, right, in the 1860s, but in terms of reorienting towards a European racialist thought, right?
Yeah.
Like, why does that change, or why does that begin to influence the intelligentsia, right? whereas as in terms of transitioning from this wholesale condemnation, perhaps of racial categories as distinctly American, black and white, to, you know, inheriting racial codifications from Darwin and, you know, the German social scientists that you mentioned, and I'm sure others.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the radical intelligence was actually born in this period of time. So there was no, like before there was no such a people, and these people tried to play the card of modernization, and they present. And I think it's like why this Mikhailov was referring to this racial discourse, because for him it was like a new way, just completely new way of thinking on like European way of thinking, or maybe also like quasi like colonial, like the way that we can oversee like all things as matter to us. We can speak for all people and about all the people, just like other like great colonial nations. I think it is, and that is what usually not a first association with radical intelligentsia.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I just, this will be my last point before I, you know, hand it over to the rest of the audience. So I brought up Sarah Bartman, or Hottentot Venus, whose, you know, exhibition, both in her lifetime and posthumously, was incredibly important for debates on abolition in England, right? So it's just interesting to me that there's this abolitionist stance pre-1864, and I'm wondering if obviously there isn't like the radical intelligentsia that we're speaking of in the 1860s, but in its attention to abolitionism, if Russia and like Russian intellectuals are sort of aware of those debates.
Yeah.
And the fact that this Black woman, this hypersexualized Black woman, who is sort of like grotesquely dissected, and her genitals are put on display, are they aware that she's like a linchpin in this discourse about abolitionism, and also like agency in capitalism and sort of selling one's labor? She becomes a linchpin for that conversation as well. So I was just curious about that, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wow, yeah, thank you. Just now I like I understood what you mean, and it's like it's fascinating. I have no answer, but thank you.
Great. Let me open up the floor to questions from the audience. I'm going to look for the little orange hands waving. Oh, I see a hand from Sarah Dickinson.
Hi, thank you very much. Thanks to both of you. That was very interesting. I was wondering, Maksim, if you could say a few more words about Chernyshevsky. I'm teaching Что делать right now, and it's shocking to me. I don't think I've found anything in there so far about Blacks, but he makes a lot of kind of bizarre comments about Chinese and Asians, you know, as being obviously so distinct from Europeans that you can say sort of whatever you want and the reader is going to agree with you. I don't know. And he seems to be on the side, you know, to be different than Dobroliubov in your scheme, right? So where do you see that? What's...
Yeah, thank you for the question. In his later life in 80s, he wrote a paper called On Race. It was as a additional paper to his translation of some historical writing for some German. And he said that actually, like, the difference in race, it doesn't matter. And he also, like, well known by denying Darwin. And for me, it is at least my explanation, but maybe I need to work more, elaborate more. That was his take on this discussion was do not make such a bold like statements like about women or towards women, towards black people, and the all like all people associated with the story. For example, Darwin, for him was not right guys. So I think maybe like he was of course he may have some like prejudice and yeah, making hostility about like some Chinese hostile statements, but he didn't like on a level of writings on a level of some like analytical discussion, he was away from this topic.
Mhm.
But he bothers himself on a race, so it is something that he want to speak about.
Maybe he rejects Darwin because someone was telling me last week that he never quite became an atheist. He wasn't quite able to get over his religious background altogether.
Yeah, and for me, for Chernyshevsky, so Chernyshevsky is like famously saying that he was like reading Feuerbach and he is like a student of a Feuerbach. And it's like for me as a like philosopher at the first education, like about like German philosophy, I think like he never read Feuerbach at all. So at least there was I think it is mystification, like self mystification. At his young, so in early stage of his publicistic career, he may receive Feuerbach only as a second-hand reception through Büchner. So, and why he made this statement that he was like a former student of Feuerbach? For me, it's unclear, but but I think it's important how he reframes himself in a later stage of his life.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking for other questions. Svetlana Gruniers. Thank you. I think you need to unmute. Oh,
Yeah, okay.
there you go.
Yeah, so I just wanted to follow up on Sarah's question about Chernyshevsky and the Chinese. It just occurred to me that in Karolina Pavlova's story «За чайным столом», where they talk about the differences between men and women, like it has the opening conversation about men and women and why women are subordinate. There is a person who sort of offhandedly says, well, of course, we'll understand, if a European goes and defeats the Chinese, that's just, part for the course. It's just normal, And so there is this assumption that, the Europeans are a stronger and higher race than the Chinese. And it says, of course, and the Chinese are so cute with their little feet and their slanted eyes, things like that. I also wanted to make a slight correction. I think, Maksim, you said that Shelgunov's Женское бездушие was written about Sakhanskaya, but that's actually about Надежда Хвощинская. Yeah, who wrote under pseudonym Krestovsky. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought. Yeah. Thank you. I thought that Sakhanskaya and Kristov. It's my mistake. Thank you for.
I know they all had pseudonyms, and Sakhanskaya, Kakhanovskaya, So Sakhanskaya
Yeah.
is Sakhanovskaya, and then Khvashinsky is Krestovsky, and it's very easy to
Yeah, it's exactly what I mixed up. Yeah, thank you very much. I will fix it.
Okay, that's all.
And you're muted.
Sorry about that. As we wait to see if there are other questions, I have one small one of my own, general. So it's fascinating to me that you have come to this question through work on dusha, right? Through your work on soul. Did you expect to encounter these questions of race when you started working on soul? And did you expect your questions to be just about Russia, or are you thinking about soul, Geist, soul, whatever, more generally? It's a fascinating topic.
Yeah. So thank you for the question, because I expected, and I thought, and it's like a curious topic, also later on 19th century, and also very like politicized, because we can also say like Geist der Nation and the soul of nation, and it's like it was very it's shown it's a important concept, but like my own motivation actually to put like philosophical discussion, and maybe like poor philosophical discussion, in a more social context. And I feel that like the topic on like Russian philosophy, it's heavily isolated from other topics, and my work, like at least my study of how psychology, because psychology, at least one part of psychology, was a part of philosophy. How for philosophers it was all like things was very relevant, and it was, and maybe you can read some like pretty sober text on psychology, on like philosophical text on psychology, but it is, you need to bear in mind this context, because it's relevant. And yeah, so I did, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. The sort of materialization of the philosophical questions. And it's also interesting because, 25 years ago or so, there was this scholarly moment where people put Black American soul side by side with Russian dusha, like Dale, what is his last name? His book on,
yeah,
yeah. So it's
yeah.
really, I think this is a very interesting way to return to these questions. And I also really love Dale Pessman's book. She's an anthropologist, Russia and Soul, where she in the 90s, she did a whole series of like years of interviews with Russians about their souls. So it's anthropology and it's contemporary, but it's absolutely fascinating. So might be interesting to you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. Marta Lukashevich. Let's see, we need you to
Yes, now I think you can hear me. So thank you very much. It was a very fascinating talk. And I have a question. Can we put this discussion about racial and gender inequality or equality together with some social inequality? I mean, in the situation of Russian society with the estate structure, perhaps there are some parallels. What made me think about it was this illustration with the word kasta, because it was very characteristic in Russian 19th century discourse of estates. I mean, I associate it mainly with the clerical estate, because they were called the clerical casta. but I think it may be somehow connected. This is the question, and when I'm talking, I just had a very interesting observation that this portrait of Ira Aldrich made by was very interesting because it didn't emphasize Aldrich blackness. I mean, if you don't know he was a black man from this portrait, you would not be sure of it, because Pushkin also had some traces, and here the background was already without. I mean, it was gray or something like this. So it was very interesting. I mean, a portrait which didn't emphasize the racial elements. Thank you.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you, Marta. And I have the same feeling about this portrait, that it doesn't like it's made like, yeah. So I just agree with you. And on the first question, yeah, I think it's at least in my like work, like my book project, when I touch a little later period, it will be also some introduction of questionary. Also, like some philosophers was actually really keen to make some empirical data. And there was a question who you ask, like who you give a questionnaire. Like, is it person from which part of the society? Like it was like always at the first place. So it's not like we ask like, for example, yeah, because it was like Zhensky Gymnasium, so the gymnasium for women, which was like pretty high level, like the top of society, educated society, and he made some questionnaire to this woman, and it was always like make a comment on it. But so this problem was rephrased in a much more technical, probably, or maybe practical also use, but of course bearing on all this idea of hierarchy in society.
Thank you. Well, Fiona, please unmute yourself.
Hi, okay, sorry about that. Yeah, Maksim, thank you for your presentation. I guess I'm asking a question that I think, like, I'm curious about the scope of your book project, but also about some of the things you shared with us today. Like you're talking about racial discourses, and your book is about psychology and philosophy. So these are two different, like we could call them disciplines or fields or methodologies. I'm curious if maybe you can tell us what other disciplines or discourses, like how you understand or would name the discourses that you've shared with us today. So, you know, we can think about race science, we can think about phrenology, like some of these are more scientifically, they think of themselves scientifically. Others are literary criticism or kind of like cultural production, like the cartoons you showed us. But, you know, as we know in the 19th century, these really were hard to distinguish, and the way people identified in like the work they were producing is kind of different than how we would identify them today. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us how you're thinking about the racial discourses that you include in this talk and in the project as a whole.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you for the question. It's really like, it's also a question for me. So I wish I will have a clear understanding how it will come to the book, because I feel that there is some risk to lose myself between different discourses. I mean, I don't know what discourse is, but for example, for me it is like academic discourse, so the people who was professional scientists or professional scholar, and which is quite differ from like this popularization of science. And because for me, I would like to show how the both discourse intertwined, but keep actually them apart. So meaning for me, it is most important to see if it's scholarly production or if it's just journalism, and then I saw that some like scholars made some like production for general public, and how these people combine both discourses. Like what bring, for example, Sechenov wrote in English specifically, in German specifically, that the conclusions that he made from the frogs are reliable only to the frogs. So it's just like very modest scientific statements. And then in Russian, he wrote a paper about like every single living being. So, and for me, it's interesting how for such a people who also publish in different languages for different audience, how they frame his own like topics. And by the way, Filona, I saw your talk on Turgenev. It was wonderful. I made it twice.
I think we're reaching 1:30. This was extremely productive. Thank you so much, Maksim, for sharing your work with us. Thank you very much, Mina, for your insightful comments. Clearly, this is an area where there's so much work to be done, and several of you who are here on the Zoom are the people doing it. So let's keep going and keep in touch with all of these ideas. Thank you so much to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye.
Bye.
Bye.